It is a warm night over at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, where a NASA astronaut, a European Space Agency astronaut, and a Russian cosmonaut are aboard a Soyuz spacecraft 160 feet atop a Soyuz booster, ready to launch a little less than an hour from now at 10:41 a.m. Central Time this morning, 9:41 p.m. local time over in Baikonur. Pretty soon we'll be bringing you live views of the Soyuz rocket on the Site 1 launch pad in Baikonur. You can see it just at the top right of this screen. It's that rocket sitting on the pad out on the Kazakh steppe. A team of launch controllers watching over all systems aboard the rocket, which at this point is fully fueled and ready for launch. No issues have been tracked throughout the day, which began several hours ago with fuel and oxidizer loading at about 5:41 a.m. Central Time, or 4:41 p.m. over in Baikonur, and was completed about 2 hours later. The launch vehicle's control systems at this point have been prepared, and shortly the gyros will be activated. Good morning, everybody, and welcome from the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, Texas. This is Mission Control Houston. Along with flight control teams around the world supporting the space station program, here in Mission Control, the team is watching over the Expedition 52 crew and the station systems and preparing to support an increase from 3 to 6 crew members later today with the addition of NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik, Russian cosmonaut and Soyuz commander Sergei Ryazanskiy, representing Roscosmos, and Italian astronaut Paolo Nespoli, representing ESA, or the European Space Agency. These three are about to begin a planned single-day flight to the International Space Station, with docking scheduled approximately 6 hours after their launch at 5 p.m. Central Time today, 4 a.m. Saturday morning over in Baikonur, where some of their tired colleagues, friends, and family of the Soyuz crew will be watching all of these events unfold. The Soyuz MS-05 spacecraft will be docking with the Rassvet module, which is also known as MRM-1, the Mini Research Module 1, a port on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the space station. And they're going to be joining the current station residents on board, Expedition 52 Commander Fyodor Yurchikhin, and then flight engineers Peggy Whitson and Jack Fisher. Peggy Whitson now in her 8th month on board the station, having arrived back on November 19th of last year. Yurchikhin and Fisher joined Whitson on the station about 3 months ago when they arrived aboard Soyuz MS-04 on April 20th. Yurchikhin and Fisher's launch held only 2 crew members aboard the Soyuz vehicle instead of the standard 3, a decision that was put in place by Roscosmos after they reduced the number of cosmonauts on the station temporarily until the arrival of the Nauka Russian Multi-Purpose Module, or MLM. The arrival of that module will increase the amount of science experiments available for those cosmonauts to perform on the station's Russian segment. The reduced crew size of that MS-04, though, opened the opportunity to extend Whitson's mission by 3 months. She was originally scheduled to return with Oleg Novitsky and Thomas Pesquet aboard Soyuz MS-03 last June, but Whitson now returning aboard that MS-04 with Fisher and Yurchikhin in September. Here in Houston this morning, the team in Mission Control monitoring today's launch and getting updates on the flight from their Russian counterparts. Today's flight director is Anthony Vareja, sitting there at the flight director console right next to Dina Cantella. And then the capcom for today's launch is going to be European Space Agency astronaut Andreas Mogensen, who launched to the station as a visiting crew flight engineer aboard Soyuz TMA-18M back on September 2nd, 2015, and returned aboard TMA-16M just 10 days later. And during the Soyuz climb to orbit, tracking and telemetry downlinked to ground stations along the flight path and routed to the Russian Mission Control Center just outside of Moscow. This a live view from one of the balcony cameras overlooking the cavernous flight control room. And you just heard for a few seconds some music being piped into the crew members by the controllers over in Baikonur. Right now, though, we are 51 minutes, 39 seconds away from the launch of these new Expedition 52 crew members. The mission's launching under the call sign Bore, chosen by Ryazanskiy to represent the mythological name of the Greek god of the north wind. The presentation of Bore is shown here in the lower right portion of the crew's mission patch, which also depicts the Soyuz vehicle approaching the station as seen through the crosshairs of the station's docking camera. The constellation Scorpio, the commander's star sign, appears below the Soyuz, while 3 stars representing each of the 3 crew members appear in the upper right portion of the patch. Then the talismans, or zero-G indicators that we'll see hanging over the crew members inside the cabin of the Soyuz craft, will be used during ascent and are small toys given to each of the crew members by their children. Those will be our zero-gravity indicators, so once they're done with their climb to orbit and in microgravity, those will start floating and we'll know that they are in space. And then 3 spaceflight veterans are launching today aboard the Soyuz craft to the space station, starting off with NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik serving as the Soyuz flight engineer in the left seat, venturing into space for the second time today. He was born in Fort Knox, Kentucky, but he considers Santa Monica, California to be his hometown. He holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics from the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, a master's degree in aviation systems from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and is a graduate of the Air War College. Before he became an astronaut, Bresnik, a retired colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps, was a Marine Corps pilot who flew as a Top Gun, a flight instructor, and a test pilot. He has over 6,000 flight hours in 81 types of aircraft. And then Bresnik also flew combat missions in the F-18 fighter jet in support of Operation Southern Watch and Operation Iraqi Freedom. He was selected back in May of 2004 as part of NASA's 19th astronaut class and completed his astronaut candidate training in February 2006. His first space flight was on STS-129, the shuttle mission, back in November 2009, where he was able to perform 2 spacewalks. Then Bresnik will transition from Expedition 52 flight engineer to Expedition 53 commander in September, following the departure of Peggy Whitson, Fyodor Yurchikhin, and Jack Fisher. And then while he's on board, he'll be serving along veteran Russian cosmonaut Sergei Rosansky, who is also making his second trip into space today. As the grandson of Mikhail Rosansky, the chief Soviet guidance designer of the Sputnik era, Sergei Rosansky followed his grandfather's footsteps toward a path to space. A research scientist with a degree in biochemistry from Moscow State University, he underwent rigorous additional training to qualify to serve as a first-time Soyuz commander on today's flight. His first flight was back on a Soyuz TMA-10M to the space station, where he served as a flight engineer during Expeditions 37 and 38 from September 2013 until March 2014. And on that flight, he performed 3 spacewalks, all with his Russian colleague, cosmonaut Oleg Kotov. Along with other tasks during his first career spacewalk, Rosansky and his crewmates carried the torch for the 2014 Winter Olympic Games outside the airlock and into space for a photo shoot. And then on December 27, 2013, his second spacewalk set a new record for the longest Russian spacewalk ever, extending that record out to 8 hours and 7 minutes in duration. And right now, Rosansky has more than 166 days in space, and then he and Bresnik will be serving alongside veteran Italian astronaut Paolo Nespoli of the European Space Agency, who is making his 3rd trip to space today. So as you can see, a lot of experience in this crew launching today. Nespoli considers Verano Brianza in northern Italy to be his hometown. He served in the Italian Army as a special forces operator and as a master parachutist. He has a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering and a master's degree in aeronautics and astronautics from Polytechnic University in New York. He was selected as an astronaut by the Italian Space Agency back in July of 1998 and then was assigned by the European Space Agency to train at NASA's Johnson Space Center in August 1998 as part of NASA's 17th astronaut class. And then both of Nespoli's space flights have taken him to the International Space Station. His first trip was back in 2007, where he was a mission specialist alongside NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson as part of the STS-120 crew aboard Space Shuttle Discovery. Expedition 52 will be the second time that Nespoli and Whitson are part of the same crew. STS-120 delivered the Harmony module, which was built in Turin, Italy. And then his second mission to space was aboard Soyuz TMA-20 spacecraft in December of 2010. He was a flight engineer for Expeditions 26 and 27 until May of 2011. But for now, everything's still on track for that liftoff time today. Again, it's going to be 10:41 a.m. Central Time, 11:41 a.m. Eastern, 9:41 p.m. nighttime over in Baikonur. During the climb to orbit, tracking and telemetry from the Soyuz vehicle downlinked to ground stations along the flight path and routed to the launch control bunker near the launch pad in Baikonur, and then over to the Russian Mission Control Center just outside of Moscow. The flight is controlled from that bunker until shutdown of the third stage engine, when it then gets transitioned to the Russian Flight Control Center. And then just seconds after the Soyuz reaches orbit, the vehicle's command and control system will be activated. A number of stored commands will deploy all of the necessary appendages of the spacecraft, including solar arrays and communication antennas, to begin collecting power to generate batteries for electricity on board the Soyuz systems. The first of the antennas to be deployed will be the Coors rendezvous and docking antenna, which is used to provide all of the range and rate of closure information during the final approach by the Soyuz for its docking to the Rassvet module. And then immediately after reaching the orbit, the crew will oversee a number of programmed activation sequence of a variety of different systems just before the spacecraft passes out of the range of Russian ground stations. And then some of those different systems include the power supply, the radio communications, and the motion control system. And then during the first orbit of today's flight, the Soyuz will automatically execute the first two of several orbital adjustment burns planned as it fine-tunes its path to the International Space Station. And then today's launch will actually mark the fifth flight of the newer version of the Soyuz, known as the Soyuz Modernized System, or the MS series of vehicles. And for right now, we're 44 minutes, 10 seconds and counting away from the planned launch time. Again, it's 10:41 a.m. Central, 11:41 a.m. Eastern Time, and then 9:41 over in Baikonur. The crew inside the Soyuz spacecraft. On this view right here, you can see the Russian Mission Control Center on those screens in the front room. The top left one, you can see two of the crew members. On the bottom of that screen is Sergei Ryazanskiy. He's in the center seat of today's flight. And then just to his left is NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik. And then here we go, a view inside of the cabin again. Ryazanskiy on the left there, Bresnik on the right, and the top right portion of the screen. Two veteran space flyers both making their second flight into space. Just off screen to Ryazanskiy's right is Paolo Nespoli, the Italian astronaut making his third flight into space today. And you can see them in their white suits, the Sokol launch and entry suits that they'll wear for all of the dynamic activities, including launch and docking and their flight up to the International Space Station. And they'll get pressurized just shortly before liftoff. You'll see them close their helmets. The Soyuz will balloon up a little bit as they get pressurized to a higher pressure than the air around them, and then they'll be ready to go for their launch. They've been in these suits for a couple of hours now, and in just a little while we'll see all of the activities that they went through just before getting into the rocket, including their wake up and actually getting suited up and saying farewell to friends and family. And we'll have that video in just a few moments. Now getting a view of Paolo Nespoli, you can see the Italian flag on his left arm there. Again, this is going to be his third flight into space. And just another reminder, in the top left of your screen, you can see two items. So you can see the small blue doll and then an item just over Nespoli's helmet as well. Those are the microgravity indicators. So they'll obviously be subject to gravity right now, but once the crew completes the climb to orbit and are in space, you'll see those start to float, and those are a pretty low-tech way of letting the crew know they are indeed in orbit. Their climb is complete. They're on their way to the International Space Station. And then on that front top right screen, you can see some of the activities from this morning. We'll work to get that direct feed to you shortly, but the crew woke up at about 1:41 a.m. Central Time this morning, 12:41 local afternoon time in Baikonur, which is about 9 hours prior to their launch. Then they participate in all their final pre-launch activities. One of that, which you can make out on that screen, they're signing the doors. That's a long-standing tradition where they autograph the doors of the Cosmonaut Hotel in Baikonur. That's the hotel where they're quarantined and stay for about a week and a half beforehand before walking out. And there you can just kind of make out they're walking out of the hotel. And that happened at around 4:41 a.m. Central, 3:41, so about 3 hours after waking up. They depart the Cosmonaut Hotel and board a bus, which takes them to the Integration and Suit-Up Facility at Building 254 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. This is one of the last few opportunities to wave goodbye to friends, family, program guests, and other officials in attendance at the launch. And again, we'll get some of this video sorted out shortly, but after they depart the Cosmonaut Hotel, the crew members load up in a bus and head out to Building 254. It's also known as the Integration and Suit-Up Facility. And then here we go. This is them arriving at Building 254, where they get ready to get suited up. You can see both the prime and the backup crews arriving together with a number of other astronauts in attendance to help, and also their flight surgeons. Here you can see Sergei Rosansky getting suited up into that Sokol launch and entry suit. Each of the crew members, one at a time, gets assisted by the various technicians there from Roscosmos and Energia. At this Building 254, they'll go through getting suited up and outfitted, and then following this, they'll actually go into a different room and get pressure checks, which we'll see that in just a few moments. But again, these suits worn throughout all of the dynamic phases of today's launch, all the way through docking. The suits are pressurized, so just in the instance of a cabin leak or anything of that nature, the crews are suited up and protected and able to get breathing oxygen and gas directly from the suit itself. The crew arrived at Building 254 at about 5:26 a.m. Central. It was 4:26 in the afternoon over in Baikonur. Before they got suited up, though, they underwent final medical exams, just a final checkup. But again, all of these crew members quarantined for about 2 weeks before launch, just to help prevent any carrying of germs or other potential illnesses to their crew members that they'll be joining on board the station. And then getting into these Sokol launch and entry suits. There we can see NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik getting suited up as well, wearing the comm cap. And then you can see, again, being assisted by these different technicians, and they're all going through one at a time. The actual suit up began at about 6:11 a.m. Central, or 5:11 p.m. in Baikonur, which is about 4.5 hours prior to the launch. And again, this all video from about 4.5 hours prior to today's launch. So this from a couple of hours ago is the 3 Soyuz MS-05 crew members were getting suited up in the Suit Up and Integration Facility in Baikonur. At this point, Rosansky and Bresnik already suited up, and then Paolo Nespoli awaiting his turn, getting into that Sokol launch and entry suit. And then once the crew is finished getting that initial suit up, they move into another room. There's a protective pane of glass in order to maintain that quarantine status. And then the crew, one by one, goes through a series of leak checks on the suits. And here you can see the backup crew, Kanai from the Japanese Space Agency. But again, the crew members, one by one, getting into a mock-up, so basically a simulation of their seat inside the Soyuz. And then technicians getting a chance to actually pressurize the suit. You can see Rosansky in the chair first, and the suit actually bubbles up a little bit as it gets pressurized with air with the helmet closed. Bresnik was up second. And then all of this video being taken from behind a protective pane of glass, all that being done to kind of maintain that crew member quarantine status. And then friends and family on the other side of the glass. As you can see here, some of Rosansky's friends, family. This actually the last opportunity that each of the crew members gets to chat with their family and friends in attendance there in Baikonur and say some of their farewells before they head over to the rocket. Here Bresnik getting his turn in the chair, the suit getting pressurized. You can see it fill up a little bit. And then following that, Nespoli, the third and final to go through this checkout as well. So again, some video taken from a couple of hours ago. The three crew members, Bresnik, Rosansky, and Nespoli, getting a chance to talk to friends and family in attendance there in Baikonur to watch their launch from that behind that pane of glass, just to maintain their quarantine status. But following friends and family, they usually get a chance to talk to some of the NASA, Roscosmos, and European Space Agency management in attendance as well. So we should see that momentarily, but this kind of one of the final moments for the crew to relax just before heading out to the launch pad, strapping into the rocket, and getting ready to blast off from Baikonur. And so again, at this point, the crew getting a chance also to talk to some of the program officials in attendance. Speaking right here is Igor Komarov, the head of Roscosmos, the Russian Federal Space Agency. A little bit further down the line, representatives from ESA, and also Bill Gerstenmaier, all the way at the end there, the NASA Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations. But again, this just kind of one of their final chances as well to speak to the crew members through this pane of glass before they head out to the launch pad. And right there, NASA acting administrator Robert Lightfoot, also in attendance for this launch, and getting to talk to the NASA crew member Randy Bresnik.
station. You take good care of the hardware first.
Thanks, sir.
And so with all those preps behind him, the crew left site 254 waving farewell. You can hear some cheers for the crew members as they walk down to salute the members of the State Commission. It was about 6:45 p.m. in Baikonur in the 90s. We were told by our friend Rob Navius, NASA PAO over on Baikonur, it's a dry heat, thankfully, but definitely some balmy weather for the crew today. Then the crew members once again boarded a bus all suited up, and that happened again at about 6:45 or so in Baikonur, and then getting on the bus for the ride over to launch pad number 1. That drive takes about 25 minutes, arriving at the pad at about 8:06 a.m. Central Time, 7:06 p.m. in Baikonur. And both the prime and the backup crews, along with NASA Roscosmos and ESA officials, arriving at the pad. And again, the crew members arrived at the pad at about 7:06 p.m. in Baikonur, getting a chance to take a few last second photos, waving goodbye at the pad, and then boarding the elevator up to the top of the Soyuz. Again, one by one, they start climbing the stairs and get a chance to do one final wave goodbye before they load into the elevator and then head to the top of the Soyuz rocket and get into the capsule, where they've been for almost 2 hours now. The Soyuz, you can see behind, already billowing oxygen, which is fueled about 3 hours prior to the launch. Ryazanski at the bottom, Nespoli in the middle, and Bresnik at the top. And then again waving goodbye one more time, and then making their way over to the elevator to ride to the top of the Soyuz rocket. And there we have it, our first live view of the Soyuz rocket at site number 1. Welcome back to the live coverage. Randy Bresnik, Sergei Ryazanski, and Paolo Nespoli getting ready to launch to the International Space Station. At this point, the suit leak checks are underway, and the emergency escape system on board the rocket has been armed. The escape tower sits at the very top of the Soyuz rocket and would fire in the event of a problem during the launch. It's designed to pull the spacecraft and the crew clear of the booster, enabling the Soyuz capsule to parachute to a safe landing, again, just in the event of any emergency during the launch or the early stages of the climb to orbit. And then emblazoned on the side of this Soyuz rocket is an image celebrating the 60th anniversary this year of Sputnik, the first artificial Earth satellite, which was launched on a modified R-7 rocket back on October 4th, 1957, from the exact same launch pad that we're looking at today. Soyuz rocket stands 162 feet tall and weighs in at 680,000 pounds. and consists of the Soyuz MS-05 spacecraft inside of a protective shroud at the top and the three-stage Soyuz FG booster below. The spacecraft was mated to its booster, and the three main stages were joined together back on Tuesday. The entire rocket was transported by rail car to the launch pad at about 7 a.m. on the dot in Baikonur on Wednesday, and then hoisted to its vertical position a short time later. And then the vehicle with its three crew members sit high above three stages of the booster, which uses RP-1, basically a highly reformed version of kerosene or rocket fuel, and liquid oxygen as the propellant. The first stage has 4 liquid engines strapped to the side of the core vehicle. Each of those will burn for about 1 minute, 58 seconds before they drop away. And at that point, the rocket will be 30 miles high and downrange about 73 miles with a velocity of over 3,900 miles per hour. And the core stage of the first also serves as the second stage and continues to burn until 4 minutes, 47 seconds into the flight. This animation showing what we were just discussing. So at launch, the engines will fire, eventually get up to their full thrust, and then overwhelm the counterweights holding the Soyuz in place, allowing it to rocket into the sky. The first stage consists of the core of the rocket and those 4 strap-on boosters you can see around the edges that continue to burn for about 1 minute and 58 seconds. After their job is done, though, shortly before, the launch escape tower, which you just saw jettison here, will fire off, and then those 4 strap-on boosters will drop away. Eventually, for those, if there's a clear view, giving something called the Korolev cross. The launch shroud will drop away, exposing the Soyuz spacecraft below. And then the second stage, once it's finished, will get ready to depart as well. They do something called a hot staging technique, so there's a lattice structure between the third and the second stage, and the third stage actually starts firing before the second stage drops away. And then the third and final stage, by the time that kicks in, they'll already be over 100 miles in altitude and downrange over 179 miles. And the third stage will burn for about 8 minutes, 45 seconds into the flight. When it's all said and done, the vehicle will be about 125 miles over the Earth. The Soyuz itself will be over the far eastern part of Russia, near the northeast border with China. Again, the spacecraft is scheduled to dock to the space station today, docking after only 4 orbits or 6 hours after today's launch at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Just 4 minutes and 5 seconds before the launch, the International Space Station will actually fly directly over the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. And launch viewers, depending on how dark it gets, may or may not be able to see the station right as it flies over the rocket. Then at the time of launch, the station will be flying at an altitude of about 252 statute miles over south central Russia, just over the northeast border of Kazakhstan. And then launch is all precisely timed for the moment when the Earth's rotation will place Baikonur in the plane of the orbit of the space station. And then at the time that the Soyuz spacecraft is in orbit in space after almost 9 minutes after launch, the station will be about 2,429 statute miles ahead as the rendezvous begins and the Soyuz begins its chase down of the station. The planned 6-hour rendezvous will culminate with docking, again, to the Rassvet module, one of the Earth-facing ports on the Russian segment at 5 p.m. Central Time this afternoon, 4 a.m. in Baikonur, where Russian, European, and American dignitaries, guests, and family will be watching all of the events unfold on TV. And then should a problem occur, though, in the first 2.5 hours of the flight, the vehicle and its crew can default to a 2-day rendezvous with docking, which would then occur on Sunday, July 30th. Atop the rocket and within the Soyuz MS-05 spacecraft, Randy Bresnik, Sergei Ryazanskiy, and Paulo Nespoli sit, and right now we are 20 minutes and 33 seconds away from launch. The whole Soyuz spacecraft itself is 23.5 feet long and weighs in at 15,650 pounds and is comprised of 3 different modules. The descent module, which is situated right in the middle of the Soyuz vehicle, contains things like customized seats for the crew members during launch, entry, and landing, and has all of the different controls and displays necessary for the flight. It also contains things like life support systems, batteries for the re-entry and landing, and the parachutes themselves, as well as the soft landing rocket engines, which slow the Soyuz down right before touchdown when it lands in Kazakhstan. There's 8 hydrogen peroxide thrusters located on the module that are used to control the spacecraft's orientation or its attitude, which way it's pointing, during the descent until the parachute deployment. It also has a guidance, navigation, and control system to maneuver the vehicle during the descent phase of the mission. It weighs in at 6,393 pounds, has a habitable volume of only 141 cubic feet, so very tight squeeze for 3 crew members while they're in there. And along with the 3 crew, approximately 110 pounds of payload can be returned to Earth and is the only part that returns to Earth. Through the top hatch, though, is the orbital module, which connects the descent to the descent module via a pressurized hatch, and that's where the crew has a small amount of room to move around during their flight to the station. It has a volume a little bit larger, 230 cubic feet, but still essentially the size of a very large walk-in closet. Has a docking mechanism, a hatch, and a rendezvous antenna located at the front end. And the docking mechanism used to dock with the space station. Then the hatch on top allows entry into the orbiting laboratory. The rendezvous antennas are used by the automated docking system, which is known as CORS, and uses radar to maneuver towards the station for the actual docking. There's also a forward-looking window in the module that they can use to take manual measurements of distance and closing speed using the laser rangefinder. It also has a couple of amenities like the toilet and some water and a small space for food for the crew members. The propulsion module, though, houses all of the oxygen storage tanks, the main engine, the attitude control thrusters, avionics, and all the major communications and control equipment for the Soyuz. Propulsion module handles all of the orbital maneuvers, including all of those needed to actually rendezvous to catch up with the International Space Station and the deorbit burn at the end of the spacecraft's mission. Before they're deployed, 2 solar arrays are folded against the body of the propulsion module, which separates from the descent module after the deorbit burn, along with the orbital module. But those solar panels span almost 35 feet and are generating all of the power for the Soyuz spacecraft systems. And the spacecraft serving not only as the crew transport vehicle to and from the station, but also the emergency return vehicle, an escape capsule, if you will, in the event the crew should have to leave the station unexpectedly. But for now, continuing to get those great views out in Baikonur. The rocket, again, fully fueled, the crew on board, and we are 17 minutes, 20 seconds away from the launch. Liftoff scheduled at 10:41 a.m. Central Time, 11:41 a.m. Eastern, 9:41 p.m. over in Baikonur. So once again, this is going to be NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik's second time flying into space and serving as after serving as a mission specialist back on Space Shuttle Atlantis during the STS-129 mission to the International Space Station. You know he's an astronaut. He's a retired U.S. Marine colonel, a Top Gun aviator, and a test pilot. But here's 5 things you probably don't know about Randy Bresnik.
I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Amelia Earhart. No, I'm not in her direct lineage. Turns out my grandfather was her photographer for 5 years before her world record attempt in 1937. And he was supposed to accompany her on the flight. But at the end, she ended up taking extra fuel instead of him and his equipment. So that simple decision in 1937, because my father was born in 1938, meant that had he gone on that flight, that I wouldn't be here today. My wife, Rebecca, and I had 2 children within 11 months. What you don't know is that they're actually 4 years difference in age. My wife likes to say one was handpicked and one was homegrown. We got to experience the wonderful miracle of adoption of our son Wyatt from Ukraine, and then the miracle of pregnancy and the birth of our daughter Abigail 11 months later. We were a very, very blessed family. I love to fly. and that's not a secret. I'm kind of like the kid who went to the air show and says, "Daddy, Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be a pilot." His dad looks at his son and says, "I'm sorry, son, you can't do both. Grow up and be a pilot." So that's kind of me. I've been very fortunate over my fighter pilot, test pilot, and astronaut career to have had the opportunity to be able to fly 82 types of flying machines so far. Everything from jets to props to helos to gliders to tail draggers to float planes, yes, and spaceships. But what you didn't know is that I've even had the rare opportunity to fly the Goodyear blimp. I still have my first car. After my freshman year at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, I came back to Southern California and purchased a 1966 Ford Mustang, which I've restored over the years. It's been a labor of love, and I would drive that cross country with my grandfather back to college for the remaining years of school. She's got 250,000 miles on her now and still runs like a top. And just last month in June, we celebrated our 31st anniversary. Beneath the crusty exterior of this old Marine colonel lies the heart of a hopeless romantic when it comes to my wife. She's the most amazing woman on or off the planet. And to show my love for her, I suggested that we have our wedding in a Scottish castle, and so we did. And in good Marine Corps fashion, we decided to have a piper at the wedding ceremonies. And then we wisely decided that the piper was the only one that had the legs to wear a kilt at the wedding.
And then again, 5 things you might not know about Randy Bresnik strapped into the Soyuz rocket. Getting a look at the very top, Soyuz itself, and the very top, that cone-shaped structure is where the very top of the Soyuz, there's a launch shroud around it right now that'll protect it during the early stages of the launch. That'll drop away once they're a few minutes into their flight. Right now, though, we're 12 minutes, 48 seconds and counting away from liftoff, scheduled at 10:41 a.m. Central, 11:41 a.m. Eastern. So a group of NASA representatives are there in Baikonur, just a short distance away from the launch pad. For an update on all the activities, why don't we go now to NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius.
Dan, if you like hot weather, you've got it. A typical midsummer night's dry heat here in the Central Asian desert as we prepare for the launch of this multinational crew to bring the space station back to its normal complement of 6 crew members. On hand for tonight's launch, having traveled all the way from Washington, is NASA's acting administrator, Robert Lightfoot, along with Bill Gerstenmaier, the Associate Administrator for Human Exploration. Space Station Program Manager Kirk Shireman is here as well, and there is a large delegation of European Space Agency and Italian Space Agency officials. It'll be a long night for this large group in attendance. We'll head back into the town of Baikonur after launch, monitor the next 6 hours of the Soyuz's transit to the station, then gather in a town hall in Baikonur for docking and what has become the traditional ceremony for hatch opening and greetings from VIPs and family members. This kicks off a jam-packed period of activity that will culminate just 5 weeks from now with the return of Peggy Whitson, Jack Fisher, and Fyodor Yurchikhin from the station, and the launch just 10 days later of Alexander Mazurkin, and for the first time since 2010, 2 Americans on a Soyuz, Mark Vande Hei and Joe Acaba. Busy would be an understatement, but we're all set to go, Dan. So with that, now back to you at Mission Control in Houston.
And that again, NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius there with the contingent, watching from just a little under a mile away from a viewing stand with friends, family, and other program guests out there at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. And we are under 10.5 minutes away from liftoff. So at this point, the vehicle gyros, the onboard flight data recorders, all activated momentarily, actually, but getting ready, just a little over 10 minutes away from the planned liftoff. And as the clock counts down to the launch of the Soyuz MS-05 crew to the space station, let's take a moment now to learn a little bit more about Randy Bresnik and his road to becoming an astronaut.
I feel like I grew up, taking photographs because my grandfather was a professional photographer. He got called onto the job, and she ended up striking a rapport with him, and because he wasn't the established or pushy whatever photographer, that she was around more often than not, she selected him to be her personal photographer in the time leading up to her around-the-world flight. He told me a story at how he was supposed to go on the flight, and that because his photographic equipment and he were taking up gas weight, they elected to ditch the photographer. Once she disappeared, he actually ended up locking away all the negatives in his repository until it was coming up on the 50th anniversary of her disappearance, when he actually went back and pulled them out. And then he spent the rest of his life going around and talking to people about his experience with her and showing his photographs. And so, I have fond memories of being a young kid in his dark room and watching, paper go through and get exposed, and then have the images come to life in the pan, and then drying them out, and just the old school photography. And so I grew up my whole life just taking photographs, trying to capture the beauty of the moment or the scene to be able to share with other people. And certainly that extension, was something I was really looking forward to on my first flight, to take pictures of our planet. And I was not, disappointed with the view. You could sit there all day, every orbit, and take pictures. You don't go over the same part of the Earth, every orbit, because the Earth's moving. And by the next time you come over that same piece of the Earth, guess what? The weather's changed, or it's nighttime, and now it's a completely different place. And so every orbit was different, every place was different, and it never, ever got old. And that's the reason why I'm really looking forward to the long-duration mission, the opportunity to be able to have more time to look at our beautiful planet, try and capture those images that I can share with people that have put me in that position to do that. I'm Randy Bresnik, and I'm fortunate enough to be one of your astronauts.
And again, this is Randy Bresnik's second time flying into space. He's going to be doing his best to share it with all of us back down here on Earth. So be sure to follow him on social media. He'll be active on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and you can find him at AstroComrade. He'll be taking quite a few photos of the Earth, hopefully matching them up with photos he's taken, himself an avid photographer of locations while down here on the ground. But if you ever want an inside look at what it's like to be in space, following them on social media can be your best way. So be sure to check him out, and a special thanks to everybody following his launch today, especially to our friends in the Marine Corps getting ready to watch one of their own launch off planet Earth and head towards the International Space Station. Bresnik actually passed along, we've heard intermittently, but music regularly pumped into the cabin for the crew prior to launch. And then one of the songs that he had on request was the President's own version of the Marine Corps hymn coming into the Soyuz today, getting him ready to leave the planet. This is a live view inside of the cabin. You can see Bresnik at the top of your screen, and just next to him, Sergei Ryazanskiy in the center seat. And then just off screen, Paolo Nespoli. We are only 6 minutes away from launch. So the crew reporting everything ready for launch, feeling good on board. At this point, the launch key has been inserted in the launch bunker, and it is a real key that they use, and that's used to transition the launch sequence into automatic mode. And we should be hearing reports, the range clear, the Soyuz rocket ready to begin its journey, 5 minutes, 20 seconds away from launch. And confirm the launch key is inserted. And again, for the crew, this is going to be a little under a 9-minute ride into orbit. All 3 stages together will burn for about 8 minutes and 45 seconds. The first stage providing the initial leg work, the core stage and the 4 strap-on boosters firing for about the first minute and a half, carrying the crew off the pad in Baikonur. So at this point, we're about 4 minutes and 15 seconds away from launch. Once the engines fire, you'll see that'll happen a few seconds before the liftoff, and they'll actually begin building up their thrust until they eventually overwhelm the counterweights holding the rocket in place. They're the 4 arms at the bottom portion of the rocket. Just above in this view, you can see 2 other arms currently connected. Those are umbilicals. One will disconnect just about 45 seconds before launch, and then the lower one will disconnect at about 15 seconds before launch.
Oxidizer and fuel drain and safety valves of launch vehicle are closed. Ground filling of oxidizer and nitrogen to the vehicle is terminated.
So at this point, the fuel flow to the vehicle has been terminated. The crew member is closing their helmets, putting them on suit oxygen, and all the commander's cockpit displays and controls have been activated. All the onboard systems switched to onboard control. One of the other milestones is all the fuel lines and the other elements of the rocket are purged, or basically purged with nitrogen. So they use nitrogen to fireproof them, removing any excess vapors, fuel, and oxidizer. Getting confirmation the booster tank now being pressurized for flight. This helps to optimize the flow of that fuel and helps add some structural support to the rocket itself. And we are 2 minutes, 15 seconds away from launch. The Soyuz spacecraft again sitting at the top. The Soyuz FG booster inside of that launch shroud, the launch escape tower on the very top. The 4 strap-on boosters in the core stage will ignite in just a little under 2 minutes. We're 1 minute 45 seconds away from launch. Again, you'll see the rockets ignite. They'll fire for a few seconds, and then once they're at their maximum thrust, they'll actually overpower all of those counterweights, and the Soyuz will lift off from pad number 1 in Baikonur. 1 minute 30 seconds away from launch. Again, at this point, the propellant feed into the rocket has already been terminated, and the booster tank is pressurized for flight. And we are 1 minute and counting.
Vehicle to internal power.
So the vehicle now on internal power, and you can see that first umbilical breaking away. And then when we see the second umbilical depart, you'll know it's 15 seconds away from the liftoff. Again, not tracking any issues with the vehicle, everything pointing to go, where it should be about 20 seconds away from launch.
Vehicle to internal power.
Auto sequence initiated. Vehicle now on internal power. The launch command has been issued. You can see the rocket engines firing.
Second umbilical tower.
Power is going to start ramping up.
Engine turbopumps at flight speed. Engines at maximum.
Turbo pumps at flight speed and liftoff. Sergei Ryazanskiy, Randy Bresnik, and Paolo Nespoli rocketing away from Baikonur and on their way to the International Space Station.
And liftoff.
can see the very bright first stage engines cutting across the night sky there on Baikonur.
25. 20 seconds into flight. All systems are
getting reports, everything running nominally or normally for the first stage, so getting good first stage performance so far. Soyuz delivering about 930,000 pounds of thrust with those 4 boosters and the single core engine.
Is nominal.
They're going to be burning liquid fuel for the first 2 minutes and 6 seconds of the flight. Already past 1 minute since liftoff. Velocity already approaching 1,100 miles per hour for the Soyuz spacecraft.
Your pitch nominal. Copy. 70 seconds into flight. Everything's nominal on board.
And continuing to get good reports from the controllers in Baikonur. Everything looking good with the rocket so far as the first stage continues onwards.
Into flight. Everything's nominal on board. 90 seconds into flight. Stage 1 and 2 thrusters are working nominally.
So we
roll pitch and you are nominal.
And we have confirmation that the escape tower has been jettisoned, and there you can see the 4 strap-on boosters flying away, making something known as the Koryov Cross. The 4 strap-on boosters now detached. The first stage has done its job, and then the core stage of the second stage continuing to burn now. At this point, the rocket already 48 miles in altitude, traveling, or rather 28 miles in altitude, the Soyuz traveling at over 3,300 miles per hour.
150 seconds and into flight. Second stage, thrusters are working nominally.
And everything continuing to look good with the second stage. Getting confirmation from the visiting vehicle officer that the launch shroud, so that protective shroud around the Soyuz spacecraft, has been jettisoned. So Soyuz now exposed during the additional climb to orbit.
Seconds. All parameters are nominal.
At this point, a little over 3 minutes since launch, the Soyuz rocket traveling at a speed of over 4,700 miles per hour. For those just tuning in, we had a successful launch. Those lights you see coming back down are the strap-on boosters and the escape tower that detached from the rocket following a successful flight. Second stage, the core stage, continuing to perform as expected. That core stage, 56 feet in length, 13.5 feet in diameter. And it has a single engine with 4 different fuel chambers, and it provides between 178,000 and 222,000 pounds of thrust, depending on the altitude. And it's going to continue firing for about 3 minutes and 28 seconds of operation. It burns until the 4-minute, 43-second mark. And then the Soyuz will use, again, what's known as a hot stage technique. So the third stage will actually ignite while the second is still burning.
Thrusters are working nominally.
A view inside the cabin, you can see things going very well for the rocket. The crew, Paolo Nespoli here in the center of the screen, Sergei Ryazanskiy in the bottom right corner of your screen. And then getting some animations now from Roscosmos, the Russian Federal Space Agency. Again, at this point, the vehicle is still being controlled by the blockhouse, the control center in Baikonur. And then following separation from the third stage, control of the Soyuz spacecraft will get handed over to the Russian mission control just outside of Moscow. And we should be coming up on the third stage. And we've heard confirmation that the second stage has separated. So that core stage separating at an altitude of about 105 statute miles. The third stage now continuing the Soyuz climb into orbit. Getting away from Paolo Nespoli, he's in the right seat. And then Randy Breznik there at the top of your screen. Sergei Ryazanskiy in the middle.
10 seconds Into flight, stability.
Everything continuing to look good with the Soyuz rocket. Being propelled by that single engine of the third stage provides about 67,000 pounds of thrust and is going to burn for 4 minutes and 2 seconds. So this is the final part of the climb into orbit. The first and second stages doing their job and dropping away.
Thrusters are working.
The third stage now going to continue. And again, this will burn until about 8 minutes, 45 seconds following the liftoff. And right now we're at 5 minutes and 50 seconds, so just a couple of more minutes to go.
350.
And then we'll see the Soyuz spacecraft separate from the third stage, and it will be in orbit and on its way to the International Space Station.
Roll, pitch, and yaw are all nominal. .380 seconds into flight. Third stage thrusters are working nominally.
Six minutes, 40 seconds since liftoff, still about 2 minutes of burning for this third stage engine. Again, just the single core stage at this point. The vehicle
and everything's fine on board.
is, again, just about 2 minutes left. By the time the third stage cuts off, it'll be in an altitude of 125 statute miles over the Earth. And it'll deliver the Soyuz into orbit, and then it'll be able to deploy the solar arrays and all the various antennas it'll need for the flight up to the International Space Station. But so far, everything going very well so far today. The team's not tracking any issues with the vehicle. The first and second stage performing flawlessly, actually giving us some pretty great views in the night sky over Kazakhstan as the first and second stages dropped away. Seven and a half minutes into the flight. At this point, the Soyuz rocket actually traveling at almost 13,500 miles per hour, ultimately going to climb up to about 17,500 miles an hour, the speed the space station's traveling at, and then it'll begin its chase down of the vehicle.
470 seconds into flight. Third stage thrusters are working nominally.
And so we're at about 8 minutes into the flight, so just a little over 40 seconds now remaining of powered flight for the Soyuz rocket. We'll keep an eye in the cabin here as you will see the astronauts get a bit of a jolt when that third stage cuts off and drops away. But once that's complete, they'll be in their preliminary orbit, be able to start chasing down the International Space Station.
500 seconds into flight. Five 110 seconds into flight. Roll, pitch, and yaw are all nominal. Parameters are nominal as well.
And there you see the crew members getting a bit of a jolt, that signifying the third stage has cut off. Getting the confirmation here that it has indeed separated.
And I am handing you over.
And so there we have it. Sergei Rosansky, Randy Briznik, and Paolo Nespoli in orbit. Their Soyuz spacecraft now about 125 miles over planet Earth.
Guys, we read you loud.
The third stage performs an avoidance maneuver and then drops away.
All right, work per page 35.
And getting confirmation from the visiting vehicle officer, all of the antennas and the solar arrays have been deployed, so that's always a good sign. The Soyuz now going to orbit at this altitude that's going to be raised over the next 6 hours by a series of different burns to place it in close proximity to the International Space Station. But a flawless launch, a flawless opening of all of those antennas and arrays. The crew now in orbit control of the spacecraft from here on out will be overseen from the Russian Mission Control Center just outside of Moscow. But a very happy Rosansky, Bresnik, and Nespoli obviously in space and on their way towards the International Space Station.
And you will be sending the RDR command via CAREL command data link in 10 seconds. Dynamic mode enabled. Copy. Dynamic mode enabled. And we are standing by for the first measurement from you guys. On your go.
На время 18:52:10. Давление ВС 784. Давление БО 812. Давление ПО 868.
At 15:52 unintelligible, SR pressure is 584, BO pressure is 813, and the third measurement is 868. Copy, Bore. And you can move on to the next page and work per the table. Copy. And we see the image. Please select Approach Display. We are done with the test of the first set of the first string. And
So again, right now, Sergei Ryazanskiy, Paolo Nespoli, and Randy Bresnik, the NASA astronaut and retired Marine colonel, now in outer space in their Soyuz spacecraft safely. Flawless launch today, and the spacecraft performing as expected. All of the antennas and the solar arrays deployed successfully, and they're now going to get ready to begin chasing down the International Space Station. They're going to perform a series of what's known as delta velocity burns, 4 of them over the next several hours, which will incrementally raise their orbit until they're up at about 250 statute miles along with the space station. After about 6 hours of flight, that'll place them very close to the station and then set them up for their docking to the Rosviet module.
17, 115, 13.6, 19, 2, 4, 4, 1, 3, 21, 1.2, 22nd, 3, 2, 9er, 23rd measure, 3, 3, 1, 24, 17.3, 25, 17.3, parameter to 26 is 271. Propellant 878. We copy all Barre 2. Please monitor the messages on the KSP panel. Bore MCC Moscow.
And we're just continuing to hear some chatter between the Russian Mission Control Center in Koryov, just outside of Moscow, and the crew members in space. Again, Sergei Ryazanskiy, Randy Bresnik, and Paolo Nespoli in orbit in their Soyuz MS-05 spacecraft, orbiting the Earth at a little over 120 statute miles. They're going to continue to raise that orbit up over the next 6 hours until they're on the level with the International Space Station at about 250 statute miles and get them set up for a docking a little bit later this evening here in Houston.
expect installation.
Everything went very well with the launch, which came right on time at 10:41 a.m. Central Time, 11:41 a.m. Eastern, 9:41 p.m. over in Baikonur in the evening. But the 8-minute 45-second trek up into orbit, very flawless for the Soyuz spacecraft. They didn't track any issues. The first, second, and third stage all performing exactly as expected and delivering the Soyuz spacecraft into its preliminary orbit. We'll stand by for just a few more minutes. We'll be bringing you some replays of the launch itself, and then we'll break away for a couple of hours until it's time to watch these three crew members dock to the International Space Station. And just to review a couple of the times coming up for you. So again, we'll have our launch replays coming up next. That should be at about 11:05 a.m. Central, 12:05 p.m. Eastern. That's showing all the replays of the vehicle lifting off from Baikonur. We'll have a post-launch video file at 12:30 p.m. Central, showing all of the pre-launch activities, the launch itself, and then any interviews with visiting dignitaries and program officials. And then we'll break away for a few hours while we wait for the MS-05 to catch up to the International Space Station, resume our coverage with docking at 4:15 p.m., with the docking itself coming at about 5 p.m. Central. We'll then break away for an hour or so while they conduct leak checks and various other tests just to get ready. And then we'll resume with hatch opening coverage at 6 p.m., the hatch opening scheduled at 6:40. And then we'll see the crew members move on to the International Space Station, and then they'll also get a chance to talk to friends and family back in Baikonur who have watched all of the events unfold today. Then the final thing tonight will be the post-docking and hatch opening video file showing all of the events from the day. That'll be at 9 p.m. Central. So stick around for replays of a rocket launching, and then join us back in a couple hours as we get ready to welcome 3 new crew members to the International Space Station, and we'll be back here on NASA TV. For now, though, thanks for tuning in this morning and watching the launch of the Soyuz MS-05. Special thanks to all our viewers following Randy Bresnik and his mission. Be sure to follow him on social media at AstroComrade on the various platforms, and we will see you in a couple of hours. So signing off for now, this is Mission Control Houston.